Welcome, music lovers. Join us as we delve into the remarkable life and untimely demise of one of rock and roll's most charismatic frontmen, Bon Scott of AC/DC. From his humble beginnings to his meteoric rise to fame, this is the story of a true rock legend. So let's dive in. Bon Scott, born Ronald Belford Scott on the 9th of July 1946, at Fife Jameson Maternity Hospital in Forfar, Scotland. Growing up in Kirriemuir, Scotland, Scott was the second child of Charles Belford Scott and Isabel Cunningham Mitchell. Tragically, their first child, a boy named Sandy, passing away shortly after birth. Scott was followed by two younger siblings, Derek, born in 1949, and Graham, born in 1953. His parents ran the family bakery in Kirriemuir's Bank Street until the family emigrated from Scotland to Australia in 1952, when Scott was aged just 6 years old. The Scott family settled in the Melbourne suburb of Sunshine, Victoria, where Scott attended Sunshine Primary School. His nickname, Bon, originated shortly after he started school, when classmates, noting his Scottish heritage and wanting to differentiate him from another Ronald in the class, playfully dubbed him Bonnie Scotland. In 1956, the Scott family relocated to Fremantle, Western Australia. Scott became involved with the Fremantle Scots Pipe Band, where he learned to play the drums. He attended North Fremantle Primary School and later John Curtin College of the Arts before dropping out at age 15. Subsequently, he held various jobs including farmhand, crayfisherman, postman, bartender, and truck packer, later training as a weighing machine mechanic. In 1963, he encountered legal troubles, spending time in Fremantle Prison's Assessment Centre and the Riverbank Juvenile Institution for charges including providing false information to the police, escaping legal custody, engaging in unlawful violations, and theft. He tried to enlist in the Australian Army but was rejected due to being deemed socially maladjusted. Inspired by his idol, Little Richard, Scott developed his distinctive vocal style. He founded his first band, The Spectres, in 1964, initially as the drummer but eventually also taking on lead singing duties. By 1966, The Spectres merged with another local group, The Winstons, forming The Valentines, where Scott shared lead singing responsibilities with Vince Lovegrove. Under this moniker, they recorded several tracks penned by George Young of the Easy Beats. Their rendition of Every Day I Have to Cry, originally by Arthur Alexander, gained traction on the local charts. However, in 1970, following the success of their single, Juliet, and amidst a drug scandal, the Valentines disbanded due to creative differences. In 1970, Bon Scott relocated to Adelaide in South Australia and became a member of the progressive rock band Fraternity. With Fraternity, he contributed to the release of the albums Livestock and Flaming Galah. It was during this period, on January 24, 1972, that Scott tied the knot with Irene Thornton. In 1973, rebranding themselves as Fang, the band ventured to the UK. Throughout their UK stint, they landed supporting gigs for bands like Status Quo and Geordie, whose lead vocalist, Brian Johnson, would later step into Scott's shoes as the frontman for AC/DC following Scott's passing. Later in 1973, shortly after Fraternity's return to Australia from their UK tour, the band went on hiatus. Scott, seeking employment, took up a job at the Wallaroo fertilizer plant while simultaneously lending his vocals to the Mount Lofty Rangers. This group was a collaborative project led by Peter Head from blues rock band, Headband, aimed at fostering creativity and experimentation among musicians. Members from both Fraternity and Headband joined forces in this endeavor, including Glenn Shorrock before his time with Little River Band. Scott also received assistance from Head in developing his own songwriting during this period. In exchange for his collaboration with the Mount Lofty Rangers, Scott recorded vocals for their songs, Round and Round, and Carey Gully. These original recordings, produced by Peter Head and Ted Yanni, were initially released in 1996. However, in 2010, an official digital release of the EP was made available, featuring newly created backing tracks for Round and Round and Round, to better capture Head's original vision. Additionally, Scott's unreleased compositions, Been Up in the Hills Too Long, and Clarissa, were recorded by Head on his album, Peter Head and the Mount Lofty Rangers Lofty, digitally released in 2011. Around 11 p.m. on May 3, 1974, at the Old Lion Hotel in North Adelaide, Bon Scott engaged in a heated argument with a member of the Mount Lofty Rangers during a rehearsal. In a drunken and distressed state, Scott stormed out of the venue, hurling a bottle of Jack Daniels to the ground, before speeding off on his Suzuki GT 550 motorbike, which led to a crash. The accident left Scott with serious injuries, resulting in a 3-day coma followed by an 18-day hospital stay. During his recovery, Vince Lovegrove and his wife provided odd jobs for Scott, such as putting up posters and painting their office, through their emerging booking management agency. Shortly thereafter, Lovegrove introduced Scott to AC/DC, who were in need of a new lead singer. When George Young informed Lovegrove that AC/DC, the emerging Sydney-based band they both admired, was seeking a new singer, Lovegrove arranged for Bond to join the band on stage in Adelaide. Instantly, a connection formed between Bond and the band members, particularly over their mutual love for artists like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, as well as their shared Scottish heritage between the Scotts and the Young brothers, Angus and Malcolm. Fraternity later reformed, with Jimmy Barnes stepping in to replace Scott. On October 24, 1974, Scott took over as the lead singer of AC/DC, replacing Dave Evans. Evans's departure was prompted by personal clashes with band members and management, indicating a divergence in direction between him and the band. With the Young brothers on lead and rhythm guitars, session drummer Tony Currenty, and George Young temporarily on bass, AC/DC launched their debut LP, High Voltage, in Australia in February 1975. Shortly after, Currenty was replaced by Phil Rudd, and Mark Evans joined as the permanent bassist. AC/DC then began recording their second album, TNT, released in December 1975. Although the first album to gain international distribution was a compilation titled High Voltage, featuring tracks from their first two albums, released in May 1976, their subsequent studio album, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, was initially only available in Australia in September of the same year. The international version of the album was released in December with a different track listing, and it wasn't until March 1981 that the album was released in the US. In the subsequent years, AC/DC continued to soar with their albums Let There Be Rock and Power Age. Released in 1978, Power Age marked the arrival of bassist Cliff Williams, replacing Mark Evans. With its intensified riffs, the album followed the precedent set by Let There Be Rock. While only one single, Rock and Roll Damnation, was released from Power Age, it propelled AC/DC to their highest chart position yet, reaching number 24. A live recording of their performance at the Apollo in Glasgow during the Power Age tour was released as If You Want Blood You've Got It. AC/DC's sixth album, Highway to Hell, produced by Robert John Lang, hit the shelves in 1979. This album marked a significant milestone for the band as it became their first LP to crack the US Top 100, ultimately reaching number 17. Highway to Hell catapulted AC/DC into the upper echelons of hard rock performers, solidifying their status as a force to be reckoned with in the music industry. On February 9, 1980, AC/DC made a memorable appearance on Aplauso TV in Spain, performing Beating Around the Bush, Girls Got Rhythm, and Highway to Hell. Little did fans know that this would mark Scott's final performance with AC/DC before his untimely death. Personally, Scott met Irene Thornton in Adelaide, South Australia in 1971 while he was the lead singer for Fraternity, and they tied the knot in 1972. However, their marriage hit a rough patch around the time Scott joined AC/DC, leading to a separation in 1974 and eventually culminating in divorce in 1977. Despite their split, they remained on good terms until Scott's passing. Together, they had no children. However, Michael Browning, AC/DC's early manager, recounted an incident in his book, Dog Eat Dog, where he visited Scott in a Melbourne hospital in 1975. Browning claimed that Scott boasted about simultaneously visiting two different women who were giving birth to his children at the same time. In recent years, Dave Stevens from Melbourne, Victoria, has made headlines by asserting that he has uncovered shocking revelations, discovering that his biological father was none other than Bon Scott. According to Stevens, his birth mother, who passed away a few years ago, disclosed that she had an affair with Scott in 1967, when the iconic rocker was around 21 years old and performing with the rock band The Valentines. Additionally, Benjamin Scott and Amy Taylor have stepped forward, asserting that they are also children of the late singer. On February 15, 1980, Scott participated in a session where Malcolm and Angus Young were working on early versions of songs later recorded for the Back in Black album. Scott played drums instead of singing or writing lyrics. Malcolm Young claimed Scott also played drums on Hell's Bells, while AC/DC drummer Simon Wright recalled hearing a demo of Scott playing drums on Back in Black. Just days prior, Scott had visited the Scorpio Sound studio in London with Mick Cox to work on the English adaptation of texts for the French group Trust's album Repression. During this visit, they did a jam session of Ride On, which would be Scott's last recording. However, sometime between the late evening of February 18 and early morning of February 19, 1980, Scott passed out and died at the age of 33. Allegedly, he had been left to sleep in a Renault 5 owned by his friend Alistair Kinnear in East Dulwich, London, after visiting a club. Kinnear found Scott unconscious the next day and called for help, but Scott was pronounced dead on arrival at King's College Hospital, Camberwell. The coroner's report concluded that Scott died of acute alcohol poisoning, ruling it as death by misadventure. On February 19, the events surrounding Bon Scott's death have been the subject of controversy, particularly regarding the timeline and circumstances leading up to his passing. In Jesse Fink's book Bon, The Last Highway, accounts challenge the official version of events. According to Paul Chapman, informed by Joe Fury on the morning of February 19, 1980, Scott was already dead. This contradicts Alastair Kinnear's claim of finding Scott in the evening. Chapman alleges that Scott left his apartment the previous evening to buy drugs and never returned. In February 2023, AC/DC photographer Robert Ellis corroborated Chapman's version, supporting Fink's narrative. Fink also alleged that Scott was not alone in East Dulwich but with Zena Kekuli, and possibly her husband, Peter Perrett. Fink speculates that Scott's death may have been caused by pulmonary aspiration of vomit due to a suspected drug overdose. Following his death, Scott's body was embalmed by Desmond Henley, cremated, and his ashes interred at Fremantle Cemetery. Despite the initial consideration of disbanding, AC/DC decided to continue with Brian Johnson as their new vocalist, supported by Scott's family. And there you have it. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Bon Scott, his impact on the world of rock music remains indelible. Despite his tragic end, his spirit lives on through the timeless music he created with AC/DC, continuing to inspire generations of fans around the globe. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content just like this. Take care and bye for now.